My name is Ben Williams. I'm a Texas broker in El Paso, Texas. I run a team called the War Team, and we're going to teach a class today called the 1 to 4 Family Contract as of 4/17/2026. That being said, we have people live in the audience, and we have people on virtual platform as well in Zoom, and we're going to get started. All right, welcome everybody. Okay, so we're going to talk about the 1 to 4 Family Contract, probably the most used form there is in our arsenal. Simply because this is what we have. What happens with resale contracts? We got to put it on this. This is our purchase contract. It's probably the most used, but most used wrong or misunderstood, or at least the form I get the most questions about. Right? I've broken it down in segments, and so what I'm gonna try and do today. This is open for questions and stuff like that. We got the mic out there if you're going to have questions. I'm going to move this along. It's a walkthrough. The walkthrough is really designed, when I do walkthroughs, it's designed for, okay, hey, look, I need to get a contract done right now. What do I do? And that being said, some of the dialogue in here, there's just got a bunch of words, but there's nothing to fill out. I'm going to touch on it, but I may not go deep into it like we normally do. Okay, I will touch on it for understanding, but I may not go like every sentence. We're not doing that today because we never finish, right? Because it takes so long. So that being said, the first section, parties, it just identifies the seller and buyer, right? That's pretty much it. The key here is that the name's got to match the legal identity of people. Now, when you talk about legal identity, we're talking about, Clarissa Valdez, right? It's a legal identity. That needs to be on her driver's license. It needs to be somewhere that she can sit there and say that's who she is. And if it's spelled different ways, it needs to be spelled the same way that's on her ID. Now, let's talk about companies for a second, because that's where we get the most questions about. How does companies be identified on here? So whatever the entity of the company may be, on their legal documents, their articles of forming the company, it needs to match that identity. All right. So what we got to do is make sure we know what that looks like. If there's a DBA, it's not really for the DBA, it's for the entity, right? The entity for the company, for this company, is 16 Tango LLC. All right. Our DBA is the War Team. So we need the entity in there. Everybody know what I'm talking about. All right. Let's go with the property. The property next is the legal description. Got to be accurate. Title is going to rely on the information inside this paragraph, so that you have to have that right. And where do we find the legal description for most properties here in El Paso? EPCAD, go to property search there. If you go to EPCAD and you don't see the property, could go to title. Yeah, that's one place. What else? We have the ability to go into RPR. All right. RPR is going to probably have the tax record on everybody. And the reason sometimes that you don't have it on EPCAD, because it could be elected officials, it could be people that's protected. You can actually, as a normal consumer, can go in there and pay for your property not to be on El Paso CAD if you wanted to. So people don't have your name, your address, and all this other stuff. So there's sometimes where people, you look that up, we're trying to find legal descriptions and we can't find them. They'll probably be in RPR. They'll probably possibly be in Remind. Not so much. If you don't have it in RPR, go to title, try and see if you can get some type of record on it. For improvements, section B covers anything attached to the property. I'm going to break this down because this is the areas that people really mess up when they're first new. All right. I've told everybody the same story. I'm going to repeat it again for the people that's new. I had a seller in a listing agreement, a listing of presentation, tell me, hey, I'm going to take my pergola. It was a Walmart pergola that had been bolted to the ground in the concrete. He said, hey, I'm taking it. Listing presentation, I was like, oh, yeah, okay, no problem. Totally forgot about it. At closing, buyers walking through, they send me the pictures of where the bolts were. The seller had took the pergola, like he said. but it was attached to the property. It was attached to the concrete. The buyer wanted that pergola because I didn't do what I was supposed to be doing. Guess who had to go to Walmart and buy a pergola that same day? It was a $600 pergola. In order to close, I had to go buy it. Moral of the story, if it's attached to the property, it conveys unless you exclude it. Okay? That's the way it is. Now, the rule of thumb that we always tell people, like, okay, hey, look, I should have did some things in the MLS and say, hey, pergola doesn't convey. When I got the property and exclusions, I should have put it down there in D and exclusions. I should have did that on my part, right? But I didn't. So at the time of closing, that item attached to the property was part of the sale. And that's what they're telling you. They're giving you examples of all the things that's attached to the property that should convey with that. And they're giving you everything for what's permanently installed. And it says all equipment, appliances, balances, screens, shutters, awnings, wall-to-wall carpeted, mirrors. They got all that stuff in there. And there's a reason they got all that stuff in there, because people try and take it. I had a closing early on in my career where somebody took the water heater. So you can learn from the mistakes I've had. People try and take stuff.
Nowadays, people are wanting to take their solar panel.
AC on the ground was missing at closing. All right. So it's crazy stuff that happens. But that's what it's about. Of course, we got that stuff back because it was part of this. But we've had some crazy stuff happen about permanently attached. And that's what that paragraph really tells you. And if it's permanently attached and it's not there when you close, either on the buyer side, you probably should go after it, right? On the selling side, you should leave it. Simply put. Accessories. They're talking about accessories. This is the stuff covered, that's movable, that should be tied to the property. Jay, you pretty close. Will you read the accessories?
Window air conditioner unit, stove, fireplace drains, curtains, rods, blinds, window shades, draperies and rods, door keys, mailbox keys, and above ground pool, swimming pool equipment, and maintenance accessories, artificial fireplace logs, security systems that are not fixtures, and controls for garage doors, entry gates, and other improvements and accessories.
I'm telling you, I've had so many closings at the very end because of garage door remotes not being there cause problems. Garage door remotes. It's going to be your nemesis somewhere along in your real estate career. Garage door remote. Remember that. On the listing side of that, make sure you have the conversation beforehand, right? On the buying side of that, be preventive. Ask the listing agent, say, hey, look, how many garage door remotes do you have? There's 2. Okay, we want to have both of them. You got to look at it from both lenses. Exclusions. This is where you're going to put anything that's like in these categories. If it's going to be excluded, that's where it's supposed to be put. I gave the example in this, like a chandelier, right? Hey, that's my grandma's chandelier. We're taking it. So we should put that there. All right. Any questions about that?
Why are cameras on there?
Why is what?
Cameras? Cameras?
Why ain't they on there?
Yeah.
They're going to be later on when we start talking about smart devices. If it's a smart device. If it's not a smart device and just a camera by itself and it's affixed to it, it should stay. But when in doubt, let's just take that as an example. It don't hurt to put it excluded or make sure everybody has an understanding what's going on. There's no problem till there's a problem. So if we do our part and make sure, if I'm on the listing side, my seller's taking the cameras, I'm going to put it in exclusions, even though it's not on there. It don't hurt, right? Or on the buying side, and you're writing the non-realty items addendum, you just want to write into the security cameras, you write it in the non-realty items addendum. So you can make sure you're clear about it. So if you see an item that's not on there and you just be clear, just write it out, either or. Thank you. All right, sales price. Let's go to the next one. Next slide. Okay, sales price. So sales price, the first portion of it is the cash portion of it, right? Now with the cash portion of it, there's some rules with the cash portion of it. In this case, it says the buyer is going to pay $7,437.50 cash. this amount cannot include funds that's borrowed, right? Everybody with me on that one? Now, I also want to say for the cash portion, that's probably important to say is that it's cash. Like the buyer's going to come in and pay it with some cashier's check or some type of way, or it's coming from their account. It's not loan in no way. When it says financing, indicates the type of financing on the third-party finance addendum. Seller financing assumption option listed but not used. I want to tell you about the financing. The key to this is saying, okay, hey, look, when we get these investors and they're getting these hard money loans and they want you to write, it's all cash, but they're getting a hard money loan from someone. It's not cash. A lot of investors want you to write the contract where it's all cash, and it's not. They're getting some money financed to them somewhere, even though it's hard money or whatever. It is still being a third party person in there, and you still have to indicate, you legally have to indicate to the seller that it is being borrowed from someplace. A lot of investors are going to ask you to write it that way. You're not supposed to write it that way. All right, you're going to be asked to do this many times, like, hey, I can't do it. You're getting a hard money loan from someone. I have to put the amount that you're getting financed here. Keep that in mind. So C is going to be the total of the cash plus the financing. In this case, it's going to be $212,500. Everybody with me? Let's keep on going. Next slide. Okay, we're going into 4, which is the leases. Basically, if there's a lease on the property, you have to disclose the lease, right? If there's any form of lease, it has to be disclosed. Documentation has to be given. The lease survives the closing unless addressed ahead of time. The lease survives the closing. So you have a person that's renting out back, mom and pop quarters out back, and they got a lease, they got a written lease. If the lease doesn't end until 24 months later, but we're closing today, lease is still valid for the 24 months unless we address it otherwise. So with investors and people that want to be owner occupants, that becomes a problem because a lot of investors want to increase the rent, right? Or something like that, right? They want to change the parameters of the lease and shorten it, whatever. They can't do that. The Texas Property Code for leasing doesn't allow that to happen. So we've had situations, let me give you examples how things happen. We've had owners create their own different incentives to get the tenant out. All right. Hey, we'll pay for your move. We'll pay for your first month rent at your other place and all these different types of things to get these tenants out prior to closing. It's a myriad of things that probably can happen on that way. Or, hey, Mr. Buyer, they're going to be here till 2060. Okay. I don't know. So keep that in mind. That's the important thing with the leases. Of course, with I want to pay attention to the residential lease. I'm just talking about that for residential leases. For fixture leases, essentially, a lot of times we're talking about the water softeners and propane tanks and solar panels. So with the solar panels, if it's going to be leased, my rule of thumb with everybody is, okay, if you go to a listing appointment and they're leasing the solar panels, first, get the documentation, right? That has to be there. In the documentation, can the lease be transferred to someone else? That has to say it because there's a lot of different rules with the solar panel companies a lot of times. There's a difference between the solar panels being paid off versus being leased, right? If the seller is going to pay it off at closing, that's a whole different thing on this. It's nothing about leasing. This is only if the solar panels are being leased and they're going to stay there, right? Now we got to get all the paperwork with that to make sure we're clear on that. Same things with water softeners. Could be a problem too with water softeners. Security systems could be a problem, but you got to have the documentation. I would rather for you, especially on the listing side, to get that documentation before you put it on the market. Like you have a clear understanding how this has to happen from the terms and agreements from the solar panel company and the water softener company and the security company or whatever, you know exactly what has to be done in order to transfer a lease to someone else before you put it on the market. Right. And a lot of times people, they don't have the paperwork and they want you to rush to put it on. You got to slow it down and say, hey, look, I really need to see this paperwork. Right. We need to understand what we're doing, because when we put it on the market, we need to be able to tell the buyers exactly how this works. Natural leases, not so much. We deal with that too much, but if there's a natural lease, you got to disclose and things of that nature too. Let's go to the next slide. All right, let's get into earnest money. Okay, earnest money. First section there, A, delivery to earnest money. It has there within 3 days of the effective date. Everybody see that? 3 days of the effective date. If the third day, and how do we count the days? If we was executing today,
0.
like she said, bam, 0. All right, okay. All right, go ahead. 0. Today is 0, right? Tomorrow's 1, which is Saturday, right? Sunday's 2, Monday 3. So you got 3 days to get earnest money and option money in. If the buyer agent want to do a inspection, you execute today, and the buyer wants to do an inspection today. You as a listing agent, can you tell them no? There's nothing stopping anything about doing an inspection prior to turning option money and earnest money. To me, that's just good buyer agency. If the third day ends on a Sunday, weekend, or holiday, then what? Next day, what? Next day is not a Sunday, Saturday, or holiday, whatever day that may be. So if Monday's a holiday, Tuesday, right? The next day that's not the holiday, okay? Make sure you're counting the days right. Day 1, or I should say the first day is day 0. Tomorrow's day 1, okay? In this case, that'll be within 3 days. It's held by escrow agent, which is the title company. I hate to jointly put the actual person in there because that person is really not the escrow agent. I've talked to jointly about that. Anyway, it's the way it is. I would rather have the title company in that spot, but jointly doesn't do that. You got the address, the amount towards the earnest money, and then the option money is there, in this case, $100, right? Funds being applied. The option money is applied first, right? So in this case, the total is $1,100. If you let your buyer go up there and pay on their own, and they go to the title company, only pay $1,000, the first $100 of that $1,000 is going towards what? Go ahead, say it. It's going towards what?
Option fee.
The option. So the earnest money being collected only has $900. It doesn't have $1,000. And now the earnest money is short. Everybody with me on that one? So that makes the earnest money short. And if the earnest money is not completely paid, then what? Brenda, you go say it. Go ahead. Say it. If the earnest is not fully paid, it's short.
Contract.
What she said?
She said you don't have a valid contract.
You have a valid contract. You have a valid contract. You just got a buyer in default, and at that time, the seller could terminate. Okay. Still got a valid contract. All right. And I think it's gonna be on the next page. Let me hold up. Option fee is credited to the sales price at closing. All right. Missing deadlines, serious, could be contract breaches. So we keep on going with the terminations and whatnot. Section B, termination for option period. Buyer gets unrestricted right to terminate. In this example, 10 days. They don't have to have an excuse. They wake up one morning and just say, hey, look, I don't want to buy it. They can terminate. All right. They have that unrestricted right to terminate. That time period typically is between 5 and 12 days. I don't see a reason why in this market today with a resale property that it should be up under 7 days. Now, in COVID, we were doing 3, 5 and trying to show sellers that they were super serious, but I just don't see a reason to do that now under 7 days. You might want to press it to 12 days sometimes because utilities might not be on, sellers got to turn them on, things of that nature. Give yourself time to do all the things you need to do for the inspections and everything that has to happen. Get the ability for the buyer to make a decision on whether they're going to move forward or not. So just keep that in mind. If terminated option money is not refunded, there's no place in a contract whatsoever that option money is ever returned. There's no situation whatsoever. Okay? There's not. Even if we do a backup contract and all, there's no place for option money to ever be returned. So be very smart about how much option money is being put up from the buyer. If you're on the buyer side of that, right? On the listing side of that, there's different ways people look at it sometimes, right? But there's no way that option money is returned or refunded to the buyer if they terminate during the option period. This is really your inspection window. Whatever inspection you want to do, this is your window to get repairs requested. This is your window to do insurance, to see if they can get insurance, to get a quote. This is your period to do all these different things, right? To make sure the buyer is really comfortable with moving forward. I really tell buyers on resale properties, I typically tell the buyer, hey, yeah, you're under contract. Yay. However, we need to do some things to see if you're going to really buy this property. And I like for you guys to adopt the same thing. Yeah, they'll be excited for a little bit. You don't get excited because on the resale property, when you execute, there's a 50-50 chance if you're going to really close a deal. Okay? 50-50 chance. They don't know that. Get excited with them, play. But there's a 50-50 chance. There's so much stuff we got to do. Your job just starts at execution. They just think you open doors. And I also say this to everybody too. You need to make sure they understand that you just don't open doors. All the stuff that you're going to be doing, it should be in your buyer's presentation and say, hey, this is what we're going to make sure you get an inspection. We're going to make sure you get a quote on your insurance. We're going to make sure all these different things. You should be telling you should be telling your buyers exactly what you're doing, right? Because they think, hey, all you do is just drive around your fancy car and all you do is just open up a door, look cute, look handsome, and that's all you do. But there's so much stuff you got to handle, all right? Where we at? Talk about looking cute. Okay. Failure to deliver earnest money. I think I got it there. If buyer misses the deadline, seller can terminate the contract or pursue remedies under default section, which is the default section is going to be section 15. We're going to talk about that later. We should be guiding this. You know what I'm saying? I just don't like hearing that, hey, I'll let my buyer take the earnest money and option money to title company. I'm like, nah, that's not the way it works, dude. You should be full service. Hey, meet me at the office, or hey, I'm coming to your house so you don't have to go to the, I'm gonna pick up your check and I'm gonna take it to the title company. I get the receipt. All right. Was turned in on time on the 3rd day. That's what you should be doing. I don't leave it to the buyer to do that. On the opposite side, as a listing agent, hey, on 3rd day, by 5 o'clock, you know, she'd be calling the title company. We got TCs checking it, but they should be saying, hey, look, receipts for title for option to earnest money is in. Okay. You should have that knowledge, because on the listing side, if they don't turn it in and you don't give your seller the option to terminate, whose fault is that? Okay. So keep on thinking about both sides of the hat when you're doing this. All right. It says here, it says there, time is of the essence for this paragraph and strict compliance with all time or performance is required. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's bold for a reason. Let's go to section 6. Section 6 is the biggest section. I think we're going to section 6. Go next page. Go back. I want to make sure I cover everything. Back. Back. Keep going the other way. You gotta go back. Back. You gotta go back. Back. All right. If you don't deliver the option money, you lose the option period. I'm going to talk about that just for a second. So you write in there's an option period. They don't deliver their money for whatever reason. You just don't have an option. right? You don't have the unrestricted right to terminate. That's all that's lost. Doesn't mean you don't have an invalid contract. Questions about that one? Because sometimes that's confusing. Hey, we didn't turn the option period in. You know, what happens now? I get these questions from the agents that let their buyer turn it in. They didn't turn in the option period, the option money. So what happens now? What happens? They lose the unrestricted right to terminate. So if they don't close, they could be subject to what? Paragraph 15, which is all of the legalese and attorneys and mediation and stuff like that. Could the seller come after that buyer if they didn't close, whatever, if that's the case. Or if they tried to terminate, but they didn't pay for the option, those things can happen too. So keep the $50 to $250 that you pay or they pay is probably the most important money that they're ever paying. It's really important. We've had questions with people like, hey, can I put in 4 offers on 4 different properties? And what if all 4 offers get accepted all at the same time? Yeah, you can do that. But the buyer's on the hook for what? Every last option monies that was required, they got to pay all 4. Then they choose. I choose that one, right? These 3 we pay option money. On this one, I got to pay option and earnest to go forward. Don't recommend. And before you do that in this company, let me know. Okay, don't be doing that. But if can you do it, you can. But you got to tell me first, please. Just because I want to know that the buyer knows that they're on the hook to pay all the option fees. Okay.
I have a question. So they lose that right to terminate for the option period
And get their earnest money back.
and get their money. But what about if they didn't get pre-qualified? That's different.
That's different.
Okay. That can be terminated because of that reason.
Right. If the lender renders the letter that they couldn't qualify, that would be a totally different thing.
That's different. Okay.
What else here? Talk about that. Okay.
I have a question on that or clarification.
All right. 6, title policy.
Ben,
Title policy just is in who's paying the title,
Ben, I don't know if he can hear us.
seller, buyer, or it can be paid by both. It can be split. If you're going to split it, you would check both boxes. And then in special provisions, you would sit there and say seller and buyer agree to split title policy 50-50 if that was the case. All right. If you check both boxes and buyer's going to pay 75%, seller's going to pay 25%, you would go to special provisions and write in seller to pay 25%, buyer to pay 75%. Okay. So if that's the way you're negotiating, you know, typically in this market right now, most times sellers are paying, right? I think we can hear you now.
Oh, Stephanie, go for it.
Can hear? Okay. So I just have a clarification because if you're talking about this, the buyer did not turn in an option fee, but they turned in earnest money.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? You sure?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I know it's a long way from Houston. I was trying to yell. Okay, so I have a clarification about option fee. So on the previous slide, you said if they do not turn in their option fee, they're just losing their right to leave the contract. But in the slide before that, you said if they turn in their earnest money, it goes towards the option first. So can you clarify when there would ever be a case that there would be no option fee?
We've had many cases like that. So we've had people go and not turn their option money in.
But if they're turning in the earnest money, that goes toward the option first.
But
So-
the situations I'm talking about is they didn't turn in anything.
Okay, so then if they didn't turn anything, then they're just, the seller can say goodbye.
Correct. Yeah. So in the situations I've been in, they just didn't turn in nothing.
Okay,
If there's steps or measures that can be taken when earnest money is not turned in, and what's the steps or measures that be taken if option money turned in, totally 2 different things. But just because somebody didn't turn their earnest money, their option money in, doesn't mean that the seller can cancel the contract. But if they don't turn their earnest money, the seller can terminate the contract. We just had this last week, unfortunately.
And Ben, can you just clarify for everyone that's here today? We talked about it a couple days ago, but on the listing side, what happens if you're the listing agent and they want to terminate and you're requesting it over and over again? Where's the option? Where's the earnest? What's the best course of action in that case?
So I want to make sure I got this. So on the listing side, they don't turn in earnest money. They don't turn in option money. Is that what you're talking about?
Correct.
And the seller wants to terminate, buyer wants to terminate. They can't terminate. You can't hold a gun to anybody's head to make them buy a house. They just subject to all of the legal stuff that can be carried with lack of performance or defect.
And as far as for best practices as a listing agent, is that something we inform the buyer's agent or just inform our client?
Oh, you should inform your client. When
Because
I
you're
tell the
right.
buyer's
We're,
agent
that's
that you're
that's a
buying-
buyer seller issue. It's not an agent issue. I just want to make sure it's clarified for our team.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with reminding the buyer's agent that, hey, look, your buyer's in default. That's fine. I hope they do. But I think our obligation is to our client more so than to the buyer's agent and the buyer.
Correct.
In regards to as a buyer's agent, in regards to the option, does the option come first before the earnest money?
It should.
Okay,
I
it
mean,
should.
if there's any money's being turned in, it's going to be applied towards the option fee first.
Okay. All right. And has there ever been a situation where an option fee was not included in the earnest money?
No. So if they turn in any types of money, it's going to be applied towards the option fee first.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good question.
Then let's take, for instance, if the buyer were to turn in their earnest money and let's say it's supposed to be $1,100 and they mistakenly get a cashier's check for $1,000. I think what you were trying to relate to us is that of that $1,000, that first 100 is going towards the option fee. So now you're short with earnest money, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly what I said. So the monies that's turned in is always applied towards the option fee first. Whatever's turned in. In this case, I gave the example about $1,000. This option fee is $100. So the first 100 goes towards the option fee and only 900 towards the earnest money, meaning the earnest money is short.
If they terminate during the option date, they can still get the other rest of the money, which can be 800, 900.
Yes, they will get whatever that $100 is lost. If they
Still
did
have the-
terminate, they will get the $900 back.
So they still have that right to terminate, right?
They do, if it's still within the option period because they paid the option money.
Okay.
Correct. Alright. So on this page right here, probably the key takeaways from here is that we indicate who pays, seller or buyer pays, right? In this market right now, we're seeing a lot of sellers pay the title policy. As you go down, it has who is going to be paid to, which is the title company, right? In this case. And then it says here, it says something about standard exceptions, right? And it's got those numbers between 1 through 8. If you read that last sentence, it says, subject to the promulgated exclusions, including existing building provisions in zoning ordinance and the following exceptions, meaning that the following things are exceptions and they're not covered unless we amend them. All right, so they're talking about covenants, taxes for the year, liens, utility easements, approved exceptions, surveys, water boundaries, and boundaries and discrepancies. Now, what they're saying, hey, look, these are not covered unless we do an amendment. Everybody with me on that one? And then that last section, it says, okay, look, if we're going to accept as is, we'll check the first box, right? Everybody with me? It says will not be amended or deleted. If we're saying as is, whatever comes out on this title policy, and we're not going to amend none of these things up there, those 8 things, that's the first box. Now, the second box says, okay, look, if we are going to amend these things, we're going to put, will be amended. And now who's going to pay for any of those 8 items if there's a problem? Everybody understand that one? Because sometimes it's really hard to understand what you're actually saying there. They give you 8 items above. And you got to understand if any of those items, those are not covered. And if there's a problem or something with those 8 items, and we need to amend those 8 items, any one of those, who is going to pay for that? And that's what that second box is. So when I explain this to clients, most time I'm saying, hey, look, and I don't really explain to clients a lot of times because it gets really weird. But I'll really explain it to y'all. I'm like, okay, if a person's saying, hey, we're not going to touch or amend any of those items, what's the problems? Do they know something that we don't? Is there a problem with the boundaries? Is there a problem with the liens? Is there a problem with these things? That makes me think, okay, why wouldn't you want to amend those things? Is there a problem? So in the best interest of the buyer, right? The second one would be the best block to check, right? Because if there is a problem, we want it changed, because if not, the buyer is going to have the problem. So just keep it simple that way. If we do have a problem, we want the ability to change it, and who's going to pay for it?
And both of them can pay it, it has to be one or the other.
It could be negotiable. It could be both. Right? Anything on here is negotiable. When you see buyer and seller, it can be either or. And if that's the case, then you have to go to press special provisions and say, okay, who's going to pay what amount and stuff like that in special provision.
So what's the best way to explain it on the listing site?
With the listing, a lot of times with a seller, I'll just say, okay, look, these items here. If it's an older home, you can get some really touchy subjects, but if it's a newer home, it's not going to be too much. If there's problems with taxes and things like that, it could be touchy. But for the most part, I've never really had an issue just on the older homes. There's going to be problems probably with homes down in central El Paso. And if you do get those problems, that's where you got to iron that with title. Let's go to the next page. All right, we're talking about the survey. In this section right here, I think survey is one of those things, either you got it or you don't. If they have it, it's probably buried in their documents when they bought it. They pull it out. If they haven't made any changes and stuff like that, this is what we're going to talk about. Okay, hey, look, you got the survey. We want it within 3 days. I think that's adequate. It's got a couple of different sections there. It says, okay, it goes on and starts talking about, hey, we're going to use the existing survey. Can you move that? Where's right there? Hey, look, the first one says, okay, within 3 days. And if you haven't, give us to it within 3 days. It's also talk about the T47.1 declaration, T47 affidavit. The T47 affidavit is probably what we're want to use now, saying the seller signs the affidavit saying they haven't made any changes and it's good to go. We're fine. We're okay. In this case, we're saying, hey, look, if it's not accepted by the title company or the buyer's lender, all right, and we have to produce a new one before 3 days before closing, we're saying seller and buyers go pay for it. Since we're saying seller and buyer, we will go down to special provisions and write in who's going to pay what, right? 9 chances out of 10, that's probably going to be a seller expense, at least in today's market, at least here in El Paso. It says within blank days after the effective date of the contract, buyer may obtain a new survey at the buyer's expense. That means the buyer is going to pay for it, right? And then the third block says within blank days of the effective date, seller expense, the seller will furnish a new survey. There's actually some banks that just require new surveys. Some lenders just actually require it. So if that's your lender that you're dealing with your buyer, you would check number 3. You just got to know what the lender requires.
And it's always 3 days.
No, it's not always 3 days. I just give my suggestion in block 1. I think it's a 3-day thing. I've seen 5, I've seen 15, I've seen 21, I've seen all different types of things. There's no rule, but I'm just giving you the way I think. Either you have the survey or you don't. Objections. Let's go to the next one. I got it. If there's title, the buyer can object title issue, survey defects, and things of that nature, all right? Or they found out, usually how I explain this objection thing, if you found out you couldn't do X and it would prevent you from buying this property. If I couldn't park my semi truck on the street, if I couldn't do short-term rentals, that's what I would put inside of the objections. And if you did, how many days you have to object is going in the next block after you've been notified. I think 5 to 7 days is suffice after you've been notified. It comes out on the title commitment, you get it, you read Schedule C, and okay, you can't park your semi truck on the street. You got 5, in this case, 5 days to object. And when you object, they have a right to, if it's curable, they can cure it. And some things are not curable. And if they can cure it, they have 15 days to fix it. And if not, then you can terminate and get your earnest money back as a buyer. Simply put. What else is there? Okay. Next thing there on the next section essentially is talking about notices. And the only thing we're going to talk about here has a paragraph for homeowners associations. If it is or is not, you would check off it is or is not, right? And that's next section there. This next section, 4 through 12, not going to talk about too much of it, but essentially it's just when you get a chance, read all that because we're just doing a walkthrough. This is about actually filling it out. On section 7, it talks about access. It essentially says, okay, look, the buyer has a right to access to the property at reasonable hours. We say reasonable hours for a rule of thumb is 8 to 8. All right, that should be reasonable, right? Of course, the seller, if they're living there, do you have to have permission? You just can't walk in while they're watching TV and say, hey, I'm doing my inspection. You got to get permission, coordinate, right? And you're able to perform any inspection you want to do. Talks about, hey, if the utilities are off, you don't want to be that buyer's agent to schedule an inspection and the utilities are off. That's like the worst thing in the world. Just shows that you're not competent. So don't do that. You should make sure the utilities are on, make sure they're on, make sure they're on. B, seller's disclosure. We have a couple of different options. You have up there, buyer has received a seller's disclosure notice. The way this typically works, most listing agents are going to put it inside the MLS. If it's hanging in the MLS and you check there's a document in MLS and you have a seller's disclosure, the buyer has received it. If you're writing the offer and you get it prior to writing the offer or prior to sending the offer, the buyer has received it. Okay, and that's what that is. You can only check one block there. On section 2, it's saying, hey, you haven't received it and you want to receive it in X amount of days. I think 3 days is adequate to me in this block. And then section 3 says the seller is not required to furnish the Texas because of the Texas property code. And there's a long list of 11 different categories that the seller doesn't have to furnish one, or if it's the government selling it, and all these different issues and things like that. Just because an investor buys a property and now they're flipping it and they're putting it back on the market doesn't mean that they don't have to provide a seller's disclosure. And I'm just saying that because that's the most common one is people say, oh, I'm flipping it, I don't have to provide one. Not true. Down there it says seller disclosure of lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards is required by federal law if it was built before 1978. The next one is D. If you see D, it says acceptance of the property condition as is, and it's defining like what is as is. Means the present condition of the property with any and all defects and without warranty except for the warranties of the title and the page. Buyer's agreement to accept the property as is under paragraph 7.1, 7.2 does not preclude the buyer from any inspections of the property in paragraph alpha, 7 alpha, from negotiating repairs or retreatments and amendments or from terminating this contract during the option period, if any. All right, the reason I read that is because this is going to be a big thing with a lot of people. They'll have you write in here in this next section about not accepting the property, and they'll want you to put stuff in there like subject to inspection. It says that right above. So if you get into that conversation with buyers and they want that comment there, just read them what's in the contract. You're gonna have a lot of buyers ask you to put subject to inspection, and it's saying it right above it. Okay, so you're gonna have that conversation a lot. Now, in this case, just for the purpose of the class, I said we didn't accept it, and I said, okay, look, we'll accept the buyer, accept the property as is, provided the seller at the seller's expense shall complete the following specific repairs and treatments. And I think we jointly did a addendum for it. And I put in here, seller to remove all debris and personal items prior to closing, buyer to have a final walkthrough and access 5 days within the closing period. If you want things in there about professionally cleaned and stuff like that, you can put that in there. Things of that nature. Okay. Okay. What else we have? We covered all that. E, lender required repairs. If you read this, either party can pay lender required repairs. There's nothing in the contract, nowhere in this contract that says the seller has to pay or fix anything. Okay. Should say pay or fix anything. It could be treatments. It could be, when I say treatments, it could be termites. Okay. Lender come back and say, hey, this house has termites. It could be a buyer or seller expense. It's not automatically just a seller's expense. A lot of times during COVID, when it's coming out with termite treatments, the buyer was paying for it. The seller wasn't paying for that stuff. So it also talks about if you don't come to agreement with lender required repairs, can terminate and the buyer get their earnest money back. If repairs exceed 5% of the sales price, buyer can terminate. Talk about FHA and VA, comes down to their requirements. A lot of different times that's based on what their requirements and their guidelines is. So it can come up often during those loans. Completion of repairs don't have to be completed unless otherwise agreed upon till closing. You're going to have this argument with people sometimes. They're going to try and say, hey, the repairs have to be done before the option period ends. It's going to come up. It doesn't say that in the contract. It says before closing. Talks about use of licensed professionals, about the repairs, where it's required to have a license. The repair must be done by the licensed professional. Roof, electrical, plumbing, stuff like that has to be done by a licensed professional. We get the question all the time, hey, my cousin is a contractor, or we are contractors, or the seller is a contractor. Great, that's okay. They're a contractor, a general contractor. They can do general repairs. They can't do stuff that has to require a license. And if they are a contractor, they need to give an invoice with the scope of work and put the warranties and guarantees on it. They should be able to do that too. Okay. So if that comes up, you should know exactly how to handle that. Seller must provide proof of completion, paid receipts, and any warranties transferable. Make sure that's there as well. If not, the buyer can extend the closing if the repairs are not done up to 5 days. Basically, always verify before final walkthrough. I think the inspector, they should go back and verify the repairs. I don't recommend no agent to go back and verify repairs. Because now you're in the crosshairs of saying, hey, this door was fixed. Okay, Mr. Agent. That's not what you want to do. All right, so send the inspector back. They bless off on it. You transfer risk to the inspector.
What if the buyer doesn't want to pay for the reinspection?
I would get the buyer walkthrough form signed off and they accepted it. I'll pay for the inspector to go back myself. All right. It's gonna be a reinspection. I think they're $100 or something like that, $75. I'll pay for it myself if the buyer. But usually I've already talked about that in the buyer's presentation about, hey, this is what's going to cost and the reinspection is going to be this. And yes, Mr. Buyer, you must pay for the reinspection. So I've already set it up. But if I get somebody that's stuck on stupid, then I would pay for it because I just don't want the problem. Okay. Any questions about that one? Thank you, sir. Okay. Next, the home warranty. So you're required by TREC to inform a buyer about a home warranty. Okay. I'll send some literature about it. It says about the residential service contracts, the agent is supposed to inform people about it. Doesn't mean they have to have it, but your job is to inform a buyer what it is, and that's the home warranty. In this case, we asked for a home warranty for the seller to pay for a home warranty up to $700. It's paid at closing. The way you want to do this, you would want to have the buyer pick the home warranty company and go over the home warranties or whatever. All right. If you are receiving any type of kickback from a home warranty company, you got to disclose to the buyer that you're getting that kickback from the home warranty company. That's the only requirement if you are getting a kickback. What else here? You got to disclose if you're related to the party in the transaction, if representing family, business interests, stuff like that. And it's not cousins, it's just immediate family. All right. You got cousins, you don't have to disclose, but if it's like, hey, it's my sister, my brother, my mom, my dad, the immediate family, you got to disclose that you're related. Closing date, paragraph 9. All right. Paragraph 9, I always like to put the closing dates on the middle of the week. I don't like doing Mondays and Fridays. Shit can happen. Right. I just like Wednesdays. All right. Especially at the end of the month and the beginning of the month, especially with title companies, they got to close out reports, things like that. It's hard on Fridays for them. So I always like to do it on Wednesdays. Section 10 is about possession. You got two choices here. You got upon closing and funding and according to a lease. So if you got some type of lease that's going on, seller is going to rent back, close, and then they're going to rent it back. Okay, that's could fall in that category. Or the buyer moved in early, you would check the second one according to the temporary lease. All right. If you got that situation, that's what you're supposed to check. If not, check upon closing the funding and things of that nature. It does talk about smart devices. All right. Smart devices like the thermostats and cameras and stuff like that. The seller is supposed to provide the username and passwords and stuff like that. Should give some type of bland password so the buyer can go in there and change them and stuff like that. You need to have that. It's supposed to remove all personal connection to these devices, right? You're not supposed to, seller's supposed to do that. At least here, let me know. I want to know what you're putting inside there just for me to have knowledge. You just want facts, right? Facts. You don't want to try and practice law on this. So if you have something there and you're going to put it there, I just ask that you tell me first. Let's go to 12. Questions up to this point. Okay, 12. In this case, we're talking about the seller's expenses on the first portion of this. All right, section 12A is all about the seller's expenses. Seller expenses in 12A, I'm talking about seller's expenses. All right, it says, okay, look, what are seller's expenses? They're giving you the categories of things, the seller's expenses. And then in B, it says that the following amount to be applied to the broker's fees that the buyer has agreed to. Which says the buyer has agreed to, that means on the buyer rep agreement that the buyer agreed to pay the buyer's agent or buyer's broker what they agreed to. Now the seller's going to pay that, right? And in this case, it gives you a flat fee or percentage. So the way it reads that the buyer has already agreed to pay you this amount, Mr. Buyer Broker. And now the seller's going to pay that amount. And that amount is 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, whatever that looks like, or a flat fee or whatever. That's how you get paid. Okay. Keep that in mind. The next one, C, says again, it's all part of the seller's expenses. It's saying, hey, look, an amount not to exceed whatever amount you try to get for closing costs, most likely you're trying to get for closing costs, to be applied to the buyer's expenses. So the first portion is about commission. The second portion is about most likely 9 chances out of 10 is what you're asking the seller to pay towards the buyer's closing costs. Everybody with me on that one? All right. All right. Let's keep on jumping. Casualty loss. On this page, it's telling you that, hey, look, after the effective date of the contract, we execute today. After this date, if something would happen to the property, how do you proceed? The house burns down, whatever. It's vandalized by kids. I had a property that like a week prior to closing, some kids jumped in the house, put holes in the wall, upstairs, downstairs, a whole mess of things happen. Some high school kids. It does happen. This came in effect. Okay. So the seller had to restore or do some things. We did what we had to do and we still closed. So if things like that happen, this is what this paragraph is about. It goes in there, says, okay, there's 3 options. The buyer has 3 options, can terminate the contract, earnest money refunded, can extend the closing up to 15 days. And it says, accept the property as is and receive some insurance money to pay for the damages. 15 is the default. Default to the contract. If buyer default, seller can enforce the performance. Terminate, keep the earnest money. When you keep them, when the seller keeps earnest money, they are releasing the buyer from the contract, meaning that they can't go after them. This contract says they can't go after them in the court of law because they kept the earnest money. So when those situations happen and the seller's, hey, I'm going to go after somebody and I'm going to sue somebody, the seller has to release the earnest money. Okay. They have to release the earnest money. Now, once the seller keeps the earnest money, everybody's free of the contract. So keep that in mind. A lot of people have a misconception on that.
I have a question. So like with new bills, if they say they're gonna return the earnest money, how many days do they have to return it?
We ain't on new bill, Jay. I don't know the answer to that question. I have no idea. I'll try and find out. I don't know.
Because Saratoga gave it to us 30 days later, so I wanna know.
I don't know because that's going to be based on their contract.
Yeah, it's based on the build contract.
So, what'd you say?
Same thing. It's based on the builder's contract. You have to read it.
What Debbie said. Thank you, Debbie. All right. But on the resale contract, this is what we deal with. What else we have there? Mediation. What I would say with mediation, just because you go through mediation is a volunteer thing. Both parties, they can't be forced, right? So you got to volunteer for mediation. And if it does go through mediation, doesn't mean that you can't go through other litigation and stuff like that. All right. So just keep that in mind. They're trying to get it done and settle things in mediation, but it doesn't just volunteer. Attorney fees, it says, hey, the buyer, seller, listing broker, other broker, or escrow agent who prevails, whoever wins, they can go out there and collect for whatever they spent. All right. Let's jump to paragraph 18. We did a whole class on paragraph 18. So I'm going to really summarize this one. Paragraph 18 is short. It defines the role of the escrow agent, meaning they're not a party to the contract. They hold the earnest money. They have limited liability. Talks about expenses at closing. Earnest money can be applied to the buyer's expenses. Excess funds can be returned to the buyer. They have the ability to do that. C, demand, if disputes. If there's a demand whatsoever, there's a process to the demand. I'm not going to go into that today, but there's a certain process for demand, right? Talks about damages and notices, all right? The last paragraph there, the federal requirements applies if a seller is a foreign person. If no affidavit provided, buyer must withhold portion of sales price sent to the IRS if there's a foreign person involved. All right, I am going to talk about paragraph 21. Notices. This is really important. Now, I tell people this all the time. You need to have this information accurate, right? At the very minimum, I feel like you should have the parties' names, their email addresses, and at the very bottom where it says buyer's agent or seller's agent, you should have your information there too. In the event there's there ever a termination, my rule for termination, if you're terminating within any guidelines, I send terminations to all parties: title, lender, listing agent, buyer agent, buyer, and seller. Right. So there's no doubt that if my client is terminating, everybody's included. That's my rule of thumb for terminating. You go or terminate. Just don't go to the listing agent. Put everybody, lottie-dottie, everybody on it. Hey, we're terminating. Okay? There's no question. Right? You're not violating anything on agency, right? Because the agency is totally over at that point that we terminate, right? So if you're terminating, that's the only rule of thumb I give you for terminating. Terminate with everybody on it. Because the buyer's agent could be in Bahamas, not getting the email. I'll just put everybody on there so there's no doubt. So that's where you want to fill all this information out. I could probably see, even though Trep says, hey, put the phone number. I could maybe see not putting that on there, maybe, right? I'll live with that one. But at least the emails need to be on there, okay? Paragraph 22, if there's any applicable addendas, that's where you're gonna check them off. All right, I will talk about for sale of other property, because this comes up a lot. I've had situations where on the pre-approval letter, I'm on the listing side, the pre-approval letter has, hey, buyer must sell this property in order to qualify. And then I get the offer and I don't have the for sale of other property addendum. Okay, so watch for stuff like that, right? Because they trying to fool you a little bit. So watch out for stuff like that. And you're required, if a buyer has it on the buying side, if a buyer needs to sell a property in order to qualify for this one, you have to tell the seller. Okay, you need to tell them that. They need to make the decision based on knowing everything. I've had situations with several agents that don't do that. And then towards the end, they cancel in the contract because they said, oh, my buyer had to sell another property. And that is terrible. If you're on the listing side of that and you never knew, have that conversation with your seller. That one sucks. But there can be some paragraph 15, things like that can come in play too as well. So these things matter. All these things up here, if they're applicable to an addendum, make sure you check off what applies. 23, attorneys, stuff like that, right? Right here at the back. So for this document to really be valid, we have to execute the contract. So whoever's the last agent after the volleys of negotiations, where everybody's done their initials, everybody's done their signature, everybody's done everything, whoever the last agent that has it should be the person to execute. You need to put the date in there, and that officially says, okay, the contract is executed. Okay, and signatures on there.
Hey, Ben,
Yes.
when it comes to the execution date, let's say all parties signed today, but for some reason it gets executed with tomorrow's date. Is that valid? If timestamps on signatures have like today's date?
Can you repeat your question?
So is there an instance where, let's say we have timestamps on signatures dated for today, and we don't execute on that line, we don't put the date until tomorrow? Is that valid?
Okay, so you're saying, okay, everybody digitally signed yesterday, and then you woke up in the morning as an agent and you decide to put the date for today.
Yeah.
Okay, technically it was executed yesterday, so that's the execution.
I've seen it. I'm asking if it's valid. Thank you for
Exactly.
clarifying.
It's valid, but in our world, and we're just talking about real estate agents, it'd probably be okay. But if you got down to like attorneys, they're going to look at the date that everybody agreed to, which was yesterday. If we
But
got into the weeds of
it's
that.
just best to verify only because it can get into issues as agents, because now you're talking about days. Time is of the essence. Yes.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I would want our people to wake up in the morning and put yesterday's date. That's what I would want our people to do. But
Okay.
I know how things go. Again, there's no problem till there's a problem. But technically speaking, if that's the situation, everybody agreed digitally yesterday, and just the agent got up and put today's date, it was really executed yesterday for the timeline and everything like that, and the court of law and things like that. We have seen this one play out before.
And so as a buyer's agent, your best practice is to not receive it with the date, say today's date versus yesterday's date.
I would
I'm
probably
just-
roll with it. I would probably roll with
Okay.
it today. But if we got down to the weeds of things, yeah, we probably have an issue. But I would probably roll with it. If I received it on the listing side and I saw the date from yesterday and everything when they executed today, even today, I would roll with it.
Okay.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, perfect. So wouldn't you send this out with the date first before you secure signatures? Or not
No.
necessarily?
No.
Would you send this document to be signed with the date first before you secure signatures?
No, absolutely not. You always
Okay.
wait for everybody to sign
There-
first.
Okay,
And then the last thing you do is put the date. Never
Okay.
do that. Absolutely never do that. All right.
Just for that, Laura, there's an option on jointly. So you can add the date there, but there's a selection where you can tell it to put the date in after the last person signs it.
got it.
That's
Thank
if
you.
you're the last person sending it out.
Okay, got it. Thank you, Mari.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Then, so you have to have the signatures. I did this on purpose on this one for the purpose of everybody, especially new agents, right? If you read this right for the broker information page, on the left-hand side, it says up under there, that first line, it says what? It says other broker, correct? If there's another broker involved representing the buyer broker, that side is filled out, right? If you're doing stuff internally here, there's no other broker involved. So the only thing you're filling out is the right-hand side. This comes up a lot, okay? A lot in the office. Now, this also goes without saying that you form intermediary the proper way. But for the sake of the class here, for the 1 to 4 family class, this is how it looks. Most new agents, when they come into the office, they're like, oh, this is wrong. I'm like, no, it's absolutely right, because we're all in the same brokerage and it's only one broker. Okay. So keep that in mind. It's not weird. It's the way it's supposed to be done. And it still identifies who's the listing agent. It still identifies who's the selling agent.
And who's responsible to turn on the intermediary form? The listing agent or the buyer's agent?
Both. Yeah. So if you're the buyer's agent, you should have already done your intermediary agreement with the buyer, right? The listing agent inside their listing agreement, they should have had intermediary allowed. And then once that happens, before the offer is placed in, the buyer's agent should have ensured that we're good to do intermediary. There's a couple of different things that have to happen internally for that to happen. And then we put the offer in afterwards. Okay. In this case, I'm not even going to talk about the last thing on 10 because we're going away from that. All right. Last thing here was about receipts. This page here, it just the receipt of the option money, the receipt of the earnest money, the receipt of the additional earnest money. If you're going to turn in stuff at title company, I think you should take this sheet with you. Buyer's agents, you're going to turn in earnest money, you're going to turn in option money, you print this out, you take it with you, and you come in there looking like a hero. Hey, I'm here to turn in option money for 8804 Mount Delano. You got your sheet right there. They're going to do everything. They'll fill out and put in jointly. But they're going to give you a receipt. They're going to give you their title receipt, but I still think you should go in there with that and have it pre-filled out. They're going to sign and put it there. Okay. Madi, what I miss from your perspective, TC guru?
Hey, so I was going to ask you, page 10 is informational purposes only, correct? But let's say I like to have all those sections filled out, meaning all of the other agents, license number, phone numbers, brokers, whatever information needs to be on there. On your perspective, is that best practice? Do you not mind if it's not all completely filled out?
I feel as though any buyer's agent in my company should have all that filled out because Jointly does it for you. Any buyer's agent of mine should have that all filled out. Of course, the listing agent's going to fill out their stuff, right? But any buyer's agent of mine should have everything filled out from A to Z.
So if I'm a buyer's agent, I like to fill out the listing agent information because it's just there and it's all there. Do you feel like that's required?
I think you should fill this whole page out. It's just professional to me. Yeah, it just shows professional courtesy. It's like our etiquette. Like it only takes about an extra 5 minutes. So that's the way I feel.
And if that, because it usually pulls the information too. As a buyer's agent, it should be pulling information from MLS.
Yeah, Jointly does that for you.
Thank you.
Okay. That was all I missed? All right, I did pretty good.
Yes, Ben, that's all I caught you on. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any questions? That's it. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. And